Okay, today is Zois Chanukah. I have to make sure the audience that I have is not someone who I don't want to take his word over to. Yochi Bukton told me over a beautiful word about Zois Chanukah. There was one thing man who was in Koil for many years, and it was time for him to go make Parnasa. So he went to the Ostrofsen. So this is back before the war. And he asked him, I want to go make Parnasa, but the problem is I'm not going to be able to learn as much as I learned until now. It's going to affect my learning. So Ostrofsen thinks about it a little bit, and he smiles and he says, the Rebbeinu Shalom has hanoah to see people independent. It's a simcha. Independence is a simcha. You even see it in the Torah. You see that they made a suda b'yom higomer elas Yitzchak. That little bit of independence that he achieved, that he's not nourishing from his mother, that's also something to celebrate. So full independence is for sure something to celebrate. And then he says, and that's Pshat and Zois Chanukah. Why does everyone make such a big deal about Zois Chanukah? We don't even know anything on Zois Chanukah. Zogt the Ostrofse, up until today, we were living off Nisim. The oil was Aidenes. After Zois Chanukah, tonight, when they lit the menorah, they already had oil that they produced. That's the biggest simcha. When you're settled and you're independent and you're able to get the oil b'derech hateva, not b'derech hanes, that's the Zois Chanukah. So I couldn't say no after 8-9. Today's Zois Chanukah. So I couldn't say this word over in my house, nor was I able to say it over in shul. But between us in the intimate setting, I can say it over as long as no one watches this YouTube video. Okay, Kavaltik. We are up to the Gemara at the bottom of Daf Samach Aleph, Amud Aleph. And we are learning about if someone says, I want my neder to expire at the end of the harvesting season of dates, of figs, Achiyavar kites, then it's Achiyakpilu Hamekzois, and we learned that meant around that what that meant is until the knives that they used to use to chop the figs up when they made it into an igulat vela, when they fold those knives. So I'm assuming they were like a Rebbe Shechala knife. They were like a pocket knife. They folded up. So until that point, the issue remains. And the Rana also tells us that since Mikzoyos knives are used to make these igulat vela, people started referring to the igulat vela themselves as Mikzoyos. So there's really two pshatim, either Yachbel Choice means when the knives are put away, or when people have gathered in already and made most of their igulat vela. So Tana, we learned. What does it mean? So you have to wait till every single one is done? No, it's when the main bulk of people have finished with their figs, that's when your nether expires. And the Ran says something very important over here. Actually, no, this is the Mafarish. So when most of the te'enim are already gathered, at that point, we consider that the end of the harvest season. And it's not like because since it's mostly done, that's called that it's over. No, when roiv of the figs are already gathered in, that's actually a sign that it's completely over, and anything remaining in the field at that point would be hefker. People wouldn't even go back for them anymore. And that's what takes us to the subject of today's Gemara on Daf Samach Beis Amud Aleph. Tana we learned, Hukvalu roiv hamekzois, if already most of the figs were gathered in, and therefore the Bailam are mafkir, whatever remains in the field, because they have no intention of going back to get them. Now the Ran use a lashon shem misiyayish mimasha nisher b'soda. They're miyayish. Achar shekaflu v'chnisu roiv hamekzois. But Toysu says Shabbayla mafkir my son. So either it's hefker, the Mafarish says hefker as well. The Ran says miyayish. I'm not sure if there's a difference. The halacha of Meiser. So mutaris mishum gezel. Anybody who wants could take them. So it wouldn't be considered stealing if you took them. Uvituris when Meiser, and we know the halacha is the Ran speaks out that why does the Levi get Meiser? Uval Levi ki ein loy chelek v'nachla imach. Since you have rights to your tevel and he doesn't, you have to give him 1/10. So we're medayik from there. What about tevel that you have equal access to the Levi and the Levi has equal access to it to you, such as hefker? Everybody has equal access to it. There's no chiyuv trumas and maasros. Zok Gemara Rabbi Yosy Rabbi Yehuda iklo lahu asra b'zman shehukpulu roiv hametzois. They reached the city, and at that time roiv of the figs were gathered in, so it would have been mutter for anybody to take any mitzvahs that were still left in the field. Rabbi Havakachel and Rabbi Yosy Yehuda lo. So the Shiloh's Rebbe ate, the Mefarshim tell us, because he wanted to show his Talmidim that, in fact, you're allowed to eat. He was teaching them halacha. Rabbi Yosy Yehuda didn't eat because he held that even though roiv people are miyayish, there might be some individuals that are not, and therefore he felt that he shouldn't eat. What happened was, as Rebbe is enjoying this meal of figs, also Marhoin, the owner, came. Amalu, and he tells them, "Amai lo achli rabbanon, why aren't you eating? Hukfulu roiv hametzoysu. Isn't it the season?" Who's he talking about? There's only one person who wasn't eating. It was only Rabbi Yosy Yehuda. So there are those who learn that Rebbe didn't come by himself; he had Talmidim with him, and that's precisely why Rebbe was eating, to show his Talmidim that you're allowed to eat it. Even though the owner already came out and already declared that I'm aware that this is all hefker, still Rabbi Yosy Yehuda didn't want to eat because he felt mishum sneers milsa. He wasn't sincere that he was mafkarit, and if we look in the fourth line from the top in the run, he was saying it like in a cynical way. You've already matter it for yourself, go eat. So he saw that this fellow wasn't so nicha, so that's why he didn't want to eat. Rab Chama bar Rab Chanina ikloy lahu asra bizman shehukpelu roiv hamekzoyis. He also came to a city where most of the mitzvahs were already gathered in, and therefore he was allowed to eat. So Havakachel, he ate. Yoiv l'shamei, he gave to his shamus. Lo yachel, the shamus didn't eat. Amr loy echol, so he told the shamus, eat gesintheit. Kach amr li Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yosy mishum aviv, hukpulu roiv hamitzvahs, mutoris mishum gezel upeturis min hamaiser. There's a couple of pshatim in why the shamus didn't want to eat. One shot is that the shamus thought that when Rab Chama bar Rab Chanina was giving him these mitzvahs, he was giving them as part of his pay package. So he said, if I'm getting it as my pay package, then I am a chuv b'mashus. I'm not taking it from Hefer. The other shot that they say is Rab Chama bar Rab Chanina, he always ate properly by a dining room table, like a mensch. So him chopping some figs in the field would be derech harai. So there wouldn't be a chiyuv from some maishus. But the shamus, he was used to chopping a snack here, chopping a snack there. So for him, since that was his normal way of eating, that could have been considered an achilas klal. And now for the feature presentation. Before a movie, they show a couple of clips from movies that they're trying to advertise for, and then we have trailers, they're called, right? And then we get to the feature presentation. So now we're up to our feature presentation. Rab Tarfon, who Grada was a kohen, and the Gemara is going to tell us he was a multi-millionaire. He was innocently minding his own business, eating some figs that he was perfectly allowed to eat. And someone saw him, obviously had a problem with it. So what did he do? He quickly shoved him into a big sack. So now Rav Tarfon doesn't know what hit him. He picked him up and threw him over his shoulder, the Mefarshim say. And he took him to the river. He was about to throw Rav Tarfon in the river. You know what that means? That means Rav Tarfon's up the creek. Literally. He was going to throw him into a river. Omar, Rav Tarfon said, Oy loy Rav Tarfon, woe to Rav Tarfon, that this fellow is going to kill him. So there's a lot of shilas on this Gemara. First of all, why did he say Oy loy Rav Tarfon? He could have said Oy li, Shezeh Hargoy. What's up with Oy loy Rav Tarfon? So there's two different pshatim I heard, one from the Ben Yoda, that he thought maybe in his name lied what his future is. As in Torah, like Yaakov said, when Yosef went missing, Torah Yosef, maybe my name created this bitter ending for me. That was one shot. The other shot is, he said, Oy loy Rav Tarfon, Oy loy Tarfon, they had horrible deaths, but it was a kiddush shem shemayim. They were killed by the rulers, I'm going to be killed by some petty farmer for no reason. Woe is to me that this is why I'm getting killed. So Shamahu Gavra, the guy, could you imagine? The guy thinks he has some petty thief, and he finds out he has Rabbi Lowy in the sack. Right? So he panicked. So Shamahu Gavra Shavke quickly put him down, Vorach, and he ran for his life. There are those who learn there's a Tarfin who ran for his life. But the Pajim Shad is the guy, he ran for his life because he was so embarrassed. He didn't want Tarfin the Chap, which is what he did. So I can't help but share the story with Rebel Yishvei. My Rosh Hashiva Rebel Yishvei was once in his white shirt and his black pants. He wasn't wearing his kapota, and he was drinking from a water fountain. And Bachrim liked making tricks on each other. So someone thought he was a regular Bachar, didn't realize he was Rosh Hashiva. He was bent over. So he went behind him and he gave him a flick. So your natural instinct would be to quickly turn around to see who did that to you. Rebellion didn't move. Our rebellion said to us, please go away quickly. I don't want to know who did that. So that's what happened over here. So Amar Abavo, Mishum Rab Chananya ben Gamliel, Kol Yomav Shal Oisei Tzadik, for the rest of Rab Tarfon's life, Hoyim Mitztar Al Dover Zeh. It ate him up, and he was terrified that he would lose his chelik in Olam Haba. Omar, he said, Oy li, woe is to me, Shenishta Mashti B'Chisra Shal Torah. I had to name drop. I had to say, I'm Reb Tarfon to save my life. I am that's but he's saving his life. What do you want from him? So we'll get there in a second. Someone who uses the Kesher Torah, he uses for his own benefit. The honor of Torah, Neker min ha'olam, is uprooted from the world, and that's touched by the Rishonim as Olam Haba. Kal v'chomer, it's a Kal v'chomer. Uma Belshazzar. Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the Beis Hamikdash and took the Caleb. And Belshazzar, we know by the party, he made a party the day he came into power, and he was using the Caleb of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, when he used the Caleb of the Beis Hamikdash, they had already been defiled, and they had already lost their status of Kedusha. So Uma Belshazzar, Shenishtamesh b'Chlikodesh, he used the holy Caleb of the Beis Hamikdash. But Shenasu Kleichoil, they had already been defiled and became de-sanctified. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, Bo Ba Peritzim v'Chilalua. Peritzim came and were mechalel. So you see from the pasuk that they are able to be mechalel the kedusha. Kivin shepartzim nasu choil. Nevertheless, Belshazzar was nekar b'no olam. After he drank and he used the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash, a hand came out of nowhere and made a line on the wall. He was totally spooked. He didn't know what it means. He called Daniel, and Daniel said, you are a dead man. And in fact, that night he got killed, and the Persians took over. So if that's what happened to Belshazzar, for defiling Caleb that weren't even Kaddish anymore, retained its Kedusha forever, Allah has come of a come. So because of that, Reb Tarfon was very, very spooked. So here we have to say that the Lubliner strikes again, because even though it's a pasuk that the Navi spoke long before the Ma'aseh of Chanukah, but there are those who learn it's referring to the Ma'aseh of Chanukah, where the Yevanim came in and defiled the Beis Hamikdash. It's actually a shaila if the Yevanim defiled the Beis Hamikdash, or if the Misyavdim, if our own Rachman Litzlan defiled the Beis Hamikdash. I believe that there's a Gemara. I don't know where the Gemara is, but it talks about the stones of the Beis Hamikdash, of the Mizbeach that were defiled, and they were piled up in one of the lishkos. So where the Gemara lists off, could be it's in Talmud, where the Gemara talks about the construction of the Beis Hamikdash. I don't remember where that is, but it discusses one of the lishkos housed these stones that they had to take off the Mizbeach because they were defiled. Okay. So therefore, Tarfon was totally spooked, and he didn't want to be mishtamish with Kesher Torah. Frock the Gemara, what was the problem? Why did this guy have a problem with Tarfon? For Tarfon, even the kiyachel, the hook pulureiva meksois hava, amai tzara hugabra. So why did the guy attack him? Well, he didn't do anything wrong. So you might ask, well, you think every farmer knows Masechos Nedarim backwards and forwards? Zokt the rush on Murdik Yisoid. Mati, do you know Hilchas Erevin because of Victoria Lake? You know a little bit, right? You know a little bit about it, right? Zok the rush, unbelievable halacha. I know all the halachas about what type of domestic awareness system you're allowed to use on Yom Tov, what you're allowed to use on Shabbos, because it's my business, right? If you have a guy who's in the meat business, he knows the halachas of salting, why it's his business. So if you look at the first wide line in the rush, The Rosh says, "Amai tayu gavra imistama kol balei nechosim bekin b'dinzeh." Farmers would have known that once roiv of the figs are taken in, anybody can take them. Whatever's in your purvey, whatever's in your portfolio, even though you're not a posek, you'll usually be very familiar with those halachas. Most cater is not a kasher, because again, it's part of their business. So this fellow ought to have known in a lawsuit, he knew or ought to have known that Reb Tarfon was well within his rights to take those pears. So what did he want? Zok Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because he had a chip on his shoulder. Mishum dahu have a ganvile invi kulashata. This fellow, he would always see shadows in and out of his vineyard, and then he would check the next morning and see that many grapes were missing. So over the last season, he lost hundreds of thousands of dollars of grapes. The chibun da achkechel Reb Tarfon, when he saw Reb Tarfon in the fields, he felt, I got him red-handed. Now I'm going to get him. So he was after him because he had assumed that this was the thief who'd been stealing grapes from him all along. Sover hainu de ganvan. So if Reb Tarfon his life was threatened, why did he feel so bad? And the Ran explains, Bishlama, if the whole reason why this balabas came after him was because of the figs that he ate. So without a doubt, how dare you use the Torah to save yourself? Pay him for the figs. Give him a $20 bill. But can you expect somebody to lay out hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for all those grapes that he didn't even steal? For that, who said that's expected of him? Maybe he's allowed to name drop and say he's Reb Tarfon. So why was Reb Tarfon upset at himself? So Mishum Reb Tarfon Osher Godel have since Reb Tarfon was uber wealthy, and the uber wealthy person darf sich losen kosten, and he shouldn't have used the name Reb Tarfon. He should have said, "I'll pay you up." I'm sorry. Could be. But at the end of the day, he had no right to use the Torah to free himself. That's what he felt. I with all of Tarfon's affairs, I would trade places with him. I hear. So let's see what the Ran says. The Ran says, "Miu." So I'm not sure how to show where I am, but I'm in the Ran. If you go to the beginning of the story of Tarfon Ashkei Hugavra, if you go right across there in the Ran, that's where I'm looking. Miu davka b'chihai gavna hu da'oser. The only reason why Reb Tarfon felt it was usher for him to use his name is the Hugavra adayin hayachayshtai u'lechava tayrasai hu shenichai. Really, the person was shoyshing him, and he only let him go because of Kavod HaTorah. So he used Kavod HaTorah to save himself. When he could have paid for it. He could have paid for it and gotten out of it, but he decided to use Kavod HaTorah. But you are allowed to announce that you're a Talmud Chacham if there are certain rights that you're entitled to that only a Talmud Chacham is entitled to, so you have to register as a Talmud Chacham. Like we're going to see shortly on Amud Beis. Shari le l'tzorva midirabanan l'meimar. A Talmud Chacham is allowed to say lo yehibne karga. I'm not paying head tax. V'shari le nami l'meimar. Shari le tigrei bereisha, and that is if they come to a din Torah, the Talmud Chacham's din Torah is heard first. Shechayotzi b'dvarim alalu zachsa Torah l'talmid chachamim k'zem shesachsu l'kehanim u'l'levim trumas ha'maishus. There are a lot of claim what's their fair share, but no one has a right to steal, and he didn't have a right to steal, so therefore he wasn't allowed to use the Talmud Chacham status to get him out of that. He should have paid, even though it costed a lot, but he was wealthy, so that's what he expected of himself. He's not guilty. He was not guilty, but he felt bad that he used his Talmud Chacham status to get himself saved when he should have paid off. He should have paid off. He should have said, "No, don't kill me. I'll pay you in full." Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says weiter. So Yachai Ma'ichin Abshim Mishum Reb Tarfon Asher Gadol Hava V'Hava Lo Lefaisoi B'Dam. Zok the Gemara weiter. Tanya, we learned. So there's actually a very big shaila about this Bolbar Pritzim V'Chalua. This was a shaila that was asked Reb Bosner. There are so many shuls throughout Europe that in Russia that over the years were terribly defiled and changed into other uses. So if you go back and acquire those properties, do those properties still retain their status of kedusha? So Rav Vosner held, because of this pasuk that in fact they don't retain their kedusha of a mismanagers. I believe that's what he passed. However, Belshazzar, even though we used Caleb that were already declassified, if we can call it that, decertified, he still got punished because he was demeaning the covenant of the Beis Hamikdash. So even those shuls, even though they don't necessarily have to become shuls again, once the goyim will mechal them, nevertheless, you have to make sure to have proper respect for those sites. Tana we learned, li'avos Hashem alekecha, lishmoya b'koiloi, u'ledafka b'oi. We have to love Hashem, we have to listen to His koil, and we have to connect ourselves to Hashem. Shelo yomer adam, a person shouldn't say, Ekra, I'm going to learn Torah. You know why? Sheyikruuni chacham. So people should call me a chacham. Eshana, I'm going to chazer good. Sheyikruuni rebbe. They should call me a rebbe. Ashana, and I'm going to sharpen myself up. Sheyizokein v'oshev v'yeshiva. I'll be able to put on a frak. Ella lamed me'ahava, learn me'ahava. The soifa covered lovoi, and the covered will come. How do you see the covered will come? Shenamar. It says when it comes to learning kosher malas b'secha. Time on your fingers, meaning Torah has to be so clear by you, it should be on your fingertips. Write it on the parchment in your heart. And how do we know that Tzeifa Kavod Lavoi? Because the pasuk says, someone who learns Torah will be treated in a sweet fashion. Torah is a tree of life to those who grab onto it. Those who support it, Mushar, will be very fortunate. So the question is, if you're supposed to learn Torah Lishma, what do you mean with Seifa Kavod Lavai? So it should say you learn Torah Lishma and forget about the Kavod. What is for Seifa Kavod Lavai? So there are those who learn that we know when we learn Torah originally, we can't be totally Lishma. But there's a rule between Shaloi Lishma and Lishma. Learn Torah even Shaloi Lishma and work towards Torah Lishma. Zok the Gemara, if you actually achieve that high level of Torah Lishma, the Seifa Kavod Lavai, the Rebbeinu Shalom will consider it that even all the learning that you did, Shaloi Lishma, building up towards Torah Lishma, will also be considered Torah Lishma. So I have a chip on my shoulder when it comes to these things. The Meforshim write about it a lot. The Rambam goes crazy about Talmid Chachamim who take money to learn. There's a long shtickle, Pirush HaMishnayos like Rambam in Pirkei Avos, where it says that you're not supposed to make the Torah akardim lachboboy. You can't use it as a profession. And he writes at the beginning, even though I made a promise to myself, I'm not going to talk about this anymore, I can't take it. I got to talk about it. And there's a long Pirush HaMishnayos like Rambam saying that so many Talmid Chachamim, they'll hate what I have to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. That it's also to take money. He says, let me ask you a question, he asked. Hillel Zokin, who had to climb up on the roof because he didn't have money to get into the Bismedrash. Are you telling me that everybody from that generation were such low lives? There were no rich people there that could have made his life easier? Of course they could have, but he refused to take because it's improper. It's a Chil Hashem. And he brings down, we learned about a Dayan whose name was Karyana, I think. When they would come to him to Paskin and Din Torah, I think we learned this in Ksubas. He would say, also we're going to get to there. He would say, I'm happy to Paskin for you, but I have a full-time job and I can't afford to miss an hour. If you pay me what I get by my job to Paskin, so then I'll Paskin for you. So once again, you see, he refused to take money. They couldn't have made him rich. He had to get a job. There was plenty of wealthy people that would have been happy to support him and make his life much easier. So the Rambam says in all of these Gemaras where we learn about these Talmid Chacham that lived in poverty, are you talking about there was such a ruthless generation of Eden and there was no money to help them out? Of course there was. But they wouldn't take any money because they felt it was a Chil Hashem. So you're not allowed to take a penny. You're not allowed to take a penny, Dr. Rambam. Rambam goes very stark. But the Ramah tells us that there's three conditions where you are allowed to take money. A, you're allowed to take money if that's the only thing you know how to do. If you have some other way to sustain yourself, Mamela, so you shouldn't take. But if you have no other way to sustain yourself, Zok Ramah, you're allowed to take. The second reason why the Ramah says you're allowed to take is if you're not going to be able to learn enough, you won't be able to learn enough and focus on your learning properly if you have to be juggling two careers. That's also a heter. And there was a third thing that the Ramah said. The third heter, I forgot what it is off the top of my head. But Moshe Feinstein.
You could say I could learn so much more if I didn't have it.
Well, it's not a question of so much more. The problem is, could you maintain the level of Rabbanis? Like Beryl Wine once said, he said it used to be that all of the Rosh Yeshivas, they all had jobs, like Rabbi Chanan Sandler. But what happened was, as the Dorish got weaker, in order to be a Rav, it's not enough to be a part-time Rav. You need to spend full-time learning. So because of that, they have to be supported so that they can be in learning full-time. So Beryl Wine says, but now recently I've noticed a change in trend that the Balabatim are trying to push it back the way it used to be. They don't want to pay Rabbanim so much anymore. That's what Beryl Wine told us years ago. But Rav Moshe Feinstein says that all of these Gemaras that the Rambam is bringing a raya from, they're only based on the Yidden of those generations that were able to survive and live and be happy and completely grow in their Yiddishkeit and their Torah, even when they're in such poverty. He says nowadays, up to Moshe, nobody's on that madriga. And the Rambam never meant for normal people like us to live in poverty and not take any money. The Rambam is talking about people of those generations that were able to live that way without it impacting their learning one hair. Us, he says, not only is it allowed to take, you're mechuyev to take, because don't fool yourself into thinking that you could live in poverty and you're going to be able to maintain a normal life while you're delving into Torah. So therefore, it's a mitzvah to take. It's a mitzvah to take if you want to be koil. That's what Rav Moshe says. And he says on them we wouldn't have Talmidei Chacham. On them we would not have Talmidei Chacham. So Rav Moshe says avada, you're allowed to take money when you're in koil because you shouldn't put yourself into a situation where you're too stressed out. Okay, so that takes care of that. I have my own beef. I had a friend. I don't want to give too much information so people shouldn't figure out who it was. And he once came to collect money from me for his yeshiva that he had in Eretz Yisrael. A Talmud of his bought him a building just on the outskirts of Yerushalayim, and he was raising money to build his yeshiva. He was very excited. Now he used to be a rebbe in a different yeshiva, so he comes with this Frock. He felt good about himself. Let's put it that way. And he said, I'm collecting money from my yeshiva. And in speaking to him, he was oozing with arrogance. So I told him, who the Frock do you think you are? I asked him. So I said, I can't give you a penny. He said, I can't give you a penny. So I said, but I told him, why can't I give you a penny? Because a Rosh Yeshiva who is doing with such arrogance, it's so about you, no, not about the Talmidim. I feel that if I give you any money towards your yeshiva, I have a hand in destroying your Talmidim, because I believe you're going to destroy every Talmud. So he tells me that Grada, I went around to all the American Mesiftas so that the Rosh Yeshiva they should send me the Talmidim, and surprised that one Rosh Yeshiva was willing to send me a single bacher. I don't know why. So I said, so he said, because of that, I have a building. So now I don't have a yeshiva, I have a koil. So I'm collecting for the koil now. I said, for the koil, I'll give you. I said, as long as you have a koil and you don't have a yeshiva, every year I'll give you. The moment you get your first Talmud, I'm not giving you anymore. So Baruch Hashem, he still has a koil. So he's okay. Because I guess the Rosh Yeshiva saw through him and they didn't want to send their bachim there. So the Ksav Sofer says something that's a little bit scary even. He says, what was Rivka so concerned about when she went past the Bais Medrash? She felt that the baby wanted to jump out, and when she went to a Beis Avodah Zarah, they wanted to jump out. So the Ksav Sofer, only the Ksav Sofer can say this. She thought that if my son wants to be a Rosh Yeshiva, that's Kavaldik. If he's doing it L'Shem Shamayim because he wants to teach Talmidim, but if he only wants Talmidim because he needs to be a Rosh Yeshiva, that's a problem. Because from the fact that this, I know he wants to be a Rosh Yeshiva, he wants to teach Torah, because whenever we pass by the Bishmesh of Shem Beber, he's jumping out. Obviously, he wants to be part of Yeshiva. But why is he jumping out by the church? Teretz is going to take any Talmud necessary so that he can be a Rosh Yeshiva. That's a problem. That's a song I don't want. That's what the Ksav Sofer says on the Rivka. Let's go back there. Zok to Gemara weiter. Rabbi Lozer bar Rav Tzadok Omer, Asay Devorim L'Shem Pa'olam. And this is how the Rosh teaches it. Do mitzvahs l'shem derabbanan shel l'shem shemayim. But learn Torah, not l'shem shemayim. Learn Torah l'shem the Torah. The daber b'hem l'shma. When you learn Torah, you have to learn it l'shem the Torah, meaning you just want to get down to the depth and understand every little nuance of the Torah. Al tasem Torah l'skatel b'hem. Don't make it like a Torah to adorn you. To the contrary, it's not about you. Al tasem kurdoim. Don't make it like an axe or a shovel. Lihiyos oider boy to dig with. In other words, don't use Torah as a tool to achieve your own goals, your own means. The Kal V'chomer, and we repeat the same Kal V'chomer we had earlier. They were already defiled. Rava said, however, if they don't know that you're Talmid Chacham, and you show up to a city, you're allowed to identify yourself. The Chesiv says in the pasuk, "The Abdecha Yorei Hashem in Urov." This was Ovadia Novi telling. I believe there was which Novi was coming to Achav. It was a Novi who was coming to Achav. He came to Achav and he told Ovadia, "Go call Achav." So at that point, Ovadia told the Novi, "I'm a Yorei Hashem." So he identified himself as a Yorei Hashem. So you see that you're allowed to. The Rosh takes it a step further. The Rosh says you're mechuyev. If you're a Talmid Chacham, you're mechuyev to identify yourself. Why are you mechuyev to identify yourself? Zok to Rosh, because Kadesh lo yizalzalu b'chava teirasa v'yanshu. You're a potential bomb, because if you're a Talmid Chacham and you don't identify yourself, and then people are mizalzel in you, it's going to lead to danger to the person who might be mizalzel in you. So therefore, you have to declare it. So the question is, why does it say shari leilenish? It should say you're mechuyev to. And the teretz is because there's a lot of nuances when it comes to these types of things. Because the Talmid Chacham shemachal al kvoidei machal. Rabbi Vosner paskins, even though there's a halacha that when the Talmid Chacham comes, he goes first, you shouldn't always invoke that. Sometimes it could be a terrible chil Hashem. If you're amongst people who don't have cheshivas for Talmid Chacham and you push your weight around because you're Talmid Chacham, because of the Gemara, that's a huge chil Hashem. That's a terrible thing to do. So that's where the Gemara says shari le not mechuyev, because you always have to know what the right thing is to do is. The Chesiv v'avdecha yorei Hashem nurav elakasher der Tarfin. So what's shot in Reb Tarfin? He also had to identify himself as a Talmid Chacham. The Gemara the Asher Gadol haya v'havele lefayse b'damim. He should have paid it off. Rava had a kash. Chesiv v'avdecha yorei Hashem nurav, which means you have to identify yourself as a Talmid Chacham. Uksiv yalal chazar v'loy picha. Izor, let somebody else praise you. You shouldn't announce it. There are those who learn this pasuk differently. Yalel chazar, let Azar announce your stature. Veloy, but if there's no zor around, picha, you should still share that you're a Talmid Chacham. So lemaisa testira, do you identify yourself or not? So Haba asked for the other like, if it's a place where they know him, keep your mouth shut and don't invoke your Talmid Chacham privilege. You should let people know so that they shouldn't be mevaz you and then suffer the fate. Amarava, shari little tzurva merabban lemeimar tzurva merabban nano. A tzurva merabban is a lot to say I'm a tzurva merabban, and the Gemara is meduyak. A tzurva merabban doesn't mean the god lador. A tzurva merabban means I'm a budding Talmid Chacham. I'm a toiling a man. So yeah, you're allowed to say that you're into learning, but that doesn't mean you should flaunt and say I'm the god lador. And therefore, shari li tigroi bereisha. Paskin for me first. In other words, if two people came to the Torah at the same time, who will get precedence? Who will the dayan focus on first? Whose case will he focus on first? On Talmid Chacham. Tichsiv, where do you see that they get first? It says Uvnei David Kayanim Hayu, but they weren't really Kayanim. But they were Talmid Chacham. Ma Kayin Noitel B'Roish, Av Talmid Chacham Noitel B'Roish. You see a Talmid Chacham is treated like a Kayin. The Kayin Minalan. How do you know that Kayin gets first? Tichsiv v'Kidashtoi Kes Lechem Alekecha U'Makriv. The Tanit very small. V'Kidashtoi L'Chol Davish B'Tusha. And what is Davish B'Tusha? Liftayach L'Rishon. He gets the first Aliyah. U'Levarach Rishon, and he benches first. Birchas Simon, there are those who learn the Birchas Hamaitzi, the little Mana Yafa Rishon, to pick the best part. And the Ram explains, if there's two Shutfin, a Yisrael and a Kohen, and you want to make sure it's completely equal, how to split it up, you have the Yisrael make the two parts to choose from, either A or B, and then the Kohen picks which one he wants first. So that makes sure that the guy who makes the two parts will make it as equal as possible. It's like a shotgun clause in a way. So that's how it's done. There are those who learn that whenever you have a roster of speakers, you have to have the Kohen speak first. The Kohen has to speak first. And there's a famous story where somebody was calling up a Talmid Chacham to speak. So he says, and now I'd like to introduce this Chosh B'Yid, Reb Chaim. He's a Talmid Chacham, he's a Goyin, he's a Tzaddik, he's a Kadosh, he's respected by everybody, and he's a Kohen. So when this fellow gets up to the dais, he tells the MC, Kohen, I'm not a Kohen. So the MC says, and all the other things I said you are? Okay. Zog to Gemara weiter. Omer Rava, Shari le'letzorvim merabodin le'memar, lo yehivna akarga, I'm not going to give head tax. The pasuk says, in order that I don't botch up how to read it, I'm going to read it inside. That's right. Minda, Beloi, V'haloch. These are three types of taxes. Minda, Beloi, V'haloch, Loi Shalit, Lemirma Aleichem. You're not ruling to put on them this tax. In other words, they don't have to pay this tax. How come I just lost my Gemara? I got to put it up again. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says over here. They don't have to give it. Vam Rabbi Yehuda, Minda, what is Minda? Zu Manas HaMelech, that's the normal tax that you have to pay from your assets. Balu, Zu Kesef Gulgalta, that's a head tax. V'halach Zu Arnuna, Arnuna is when the army or the king comes to town, the town is responsible to sustain the king. So they have to give him whatever meals and whatever provisions he needs while he's there. V'amarava, Shari le'letzova merabbanan le'meimar abda denurana. He's even allowed to say that Talmid Chacham who's entitled not to pay tax, but I guess he's afraid they won't honor his status. He's allowed to say, I work for the fire, which is an Avodah Zarah, where I could work for the priest of the Avodah Zarah fire. He's allowed to say that to get out of paying tax. And therefore, lo yehibna karga, enough to pay tax. Why can you do that? My timer, la bruche aya mine kamar. He's just trying to save his assets from the overreaching government. And the Ran speaks out. Anyone who works in this temple is potter. Doesn't it make it look like he is supporting Avodah Zarah? It's obvious to anyone that he's not really being moed in the Avodah Zarah. He's just doing it to get out of paying the cargo. That it says a tzurva merabbanon could do it, anybody could do that. The point is that even if a tzurva merabbanon, even he could say that. Why? Because they could say they understood when he said I'm a servant of fire that it's referring to the Avodah Zarah fire. But the Kohen, but the Talmid Chacham, when he says it, he really means I am a servant of fire of Hashem Elokecha Eish Eichlahu. That's what he means. Right to Gemara. What about Rav Ashi Abba Abba? He had a forest, Zavna Leveinura, and he sold it to such a temple, a fire. Isn't there an Isra of Lifnei Iver? So right over here you have a raya that the Isra of Lifnei Iver even applies for a goy. If you're machshel a goy and doing an avera, that's also Lifnei Iver. Most of the wood that people use, even them, is for regular purposes of fuel. Yes, they use some wood to be Oived Avodah Zarah, but roiv of it is for fuel. So therefore, it's not a problem of Lifnei Iver. It might be an Isser of Misayeya Lidei Oived Avera, but the Isser of Misayeya does not apply to Goyim. Only the Isser of Lifnei Iver applies to Goyim. Gewaltig. Zogt Gemara weiter. Arak Tzir. What if somebody said, my nether should expire at the Ktsir, when we start harvesting? So harvesting what? Ad sheyaschalo liktzar. That means up until when people start harvesting, but what? Ktsir chitin. It's referring to Ktsir chitin because that's what people normally mean when they say Ktsir. Avaloi Ktsir Siren, but not Siren. So if for some, the fire says that people started to harvest barley earlier than they harvested wheat. So when you say harvest, you don't mean barley, you mean wheat. And again, it also depends on where you are at the time that you made your neder. That'll dictate what you meant. For instance, it seems like the fruits would be ready to be harvested earlier in the bika than they would be in the har. So it doesn't matter where you are at the end of your neder. While you made your neder, if you're a bahar, then you're answering yourself from drinking wine until the harvest season starts in the har. Masha'enkein, if you were in the bika when you made the neder, then the neder expires when they normally do the harvest when they actually start doing the harvest in the bika. Ara geshamin, what if someone says, I'm going to remain in my Isser until it rains, or achi Yehuah geshamin, or until after the rain, right? She always means after the rain. There's 3 rounds of rain that come. So this in the beginning of the rainy season, and we're going to learn tomorrow when the normal time frame for these rains are supposed to come. And based on that, we know at what point we have to start taking action if it doesn't rain. But the second front of rain is what a person normally refers to when he says Arak Shalom. The problem you might ask is we said by Pesach, if you said Achi Yeheya Pesach, then your nether only expires after Pesach. So why, when you say Achi Yehuah Geshamim, does your nether expire before the rain, when the rain starts? The answer is because we learned yesterday that a person doesn't want to put himself into a suffix. So unless there's a finite, there's a known beginning and a known end, such as Pesach, I'm never going to put myself into an open-ended situation. Since I don't know when the rain's going to stop, even if I say Achi Yehuah Geshamim until the rain is over, you don't mean to ask yourself until the rain is over because you don't know when that is, and that's open-ended. So automatically we say that you have in mind to expire the nether when the rain starts. Even before the rain starts, even if it didn't start raining that year, for some reason the rain's delayed, what you meant is the time where it normally starts to rain. And the Gemara is going to get into the differences. What if I said very explicitly, I'm going to keep my nether until the Geshavim stop? So then it's Nisan Kuloi. Until the end of Chodesh Nisan, we still consider it a rainy season. Divrei Meir, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Yavar Pesach, until Pesach passes. We'll just learn one more stick of Gemara, very simple Gemara, then we'll stop. Tanya Hanoider out at the kites. If someone was noider until the harvest season, kites we learned is when you're cutting to Einem down. The Galil, but he was in Galil, which is a high level, which is a high altitude. The Yard Lamokim, and now he went down to the valley area where the harvest starts earlier. Because of what we said, that it depends on where he was when he made the nether. When he made the nether, he was in the Galil, which has a later harvest. So his intent was to maintain his nether until that later time. Okay, we will stop here and we will mamish Bezos tomorrow. So I wanted to share another story, but it was running late about